Baruch atah Adonai Melech she'akol nהיה b'ro. We good? We're streaming. Shalom Aleichem Rabotai. Today's daf is Kesuvos Lamed Zayin. The sponsors today, we have a Talmud Torah sponsorship by Paul and Kathy Pollock in honor of their grandchildren, Tikva, Esther, Simcha, Avigoil, Milona, and Milicenta. May they grow to become the best version of themselves. We have a daf Yomi Shir sponsorship. Zechut Refuah Shlema for Yehuda ben Michal, the son of myself, and I really want to thank you. You've been amazing, and I really hope I give you all a bracha that none of you should have to know what great Balei Chasadim this community is. People come out of nowhere to give tremendous amounts of chesed, tremendous amounts of their time and energy to a family in need. I hope you never need to know how great this community really is. And one more week of learning sponsorship by Gail and Doug Stanger. Mazel Tov to Akiva Lev Weinberg on his bar mitzvah from Bavi and Saba. Shkoyach. Thank you, Moshe. We are picking up on Lamed Vav Amud Beis. And I spoke to Rabbi Richter yesterday, and he said the last bit he was going a little too fast, so he asked me to go back to the Gemara. This Mishnah that we just had yesterday, we started yesterday, remember that a few days back we had the girls who get a kanas. Remember, if a betula or a besula is violated, there is a knas, a penalty fine of 50 shekel. And as Rabbi Silber said it's been a little while, over a week ago, that's on top of the other damages. This is sort of the exception that proves the rule. We've talked about a concept of kim le b'derabba minei. We give the guy the worst punishment. If he's chayav money and death, we're going to kill the guy, but he's not going to pay the money. But ma'anis, violating a betula, that's an exception that proves the rule, because not only does he pay the 50 shekel, but he also pays for any injuries, any medical bills, any depreciation, any embarrassment, the shame, the actual the actual damages from the assault. So he's on the hook for all of the damages. So don't just think the Torah is like, oh, if a guy is ma'anis, a non-basula, there's no penalty. No, there is a penalty, but that's a bavakama issue. We're only dealing with the Kesuvos issue here, so we're only talking about the 50 shekel, the 50 shekel knas, but bavakama, when we talk about damages for personal injury, there's a whole bunch more damages he's on the hook for. It's kind of an exception. So going back to the Gemara, so that was that Mishnah. So the Mishnah here was talking about the exceptions, the ones who don't get a knas, even though there might have been a reason that they should if they were subject to being ma'anis, lo aleinu, and lo on our daughters too. So the Gemara said, Am Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Dosa, Amru Davar Echad. Recall in the Mishnah yesterday, Rabbi Yehuda said we don't assume that a woman who was captured by pagan bandits got violated. Now that's a chiddush because for the past 3 or 4 weeks, we've been assuming they were. And all the other Tanaim seem to hold that, yeah, you can kind of assume Nebuch, it's a terrible thing, that when a Jewish woman was captured by these pagan criminals, that they would usually take advantage of her. Now, we did see an exception a couple weeks ago if they are intending to ransom her back to her family or to, sell her to Jews who would be poder to do pidyon shvuyim. Maybe they wouldn't because they'd get more money for her if they don't violate her. So there are some mitigating factors where maybe a woman in captivity with the pagans would not be violated, thank God. But in general, yeah, they had no boundaries. They were already, they're terrible people. You don't want to be near them. They're no good. So we could assume that they were. But Rabbi Yehuda says, no, we don't assume that she was violated. Rabbi Yochanan here is saying, that sounds like Rabbi Dosa. Rabbi Huda Hada Amran, like the Mishnah said, Rabbi Huda says we don't assume she was violated. Rabbi Dosa, the Tanya, the Brisa says Shavuya Ochelis Betruma, a captured woman who comes back and she's a Bas Kohen or Life of Kohen, she could still eat truma. We assume she wasn't violated by a non-Jew, which would make her now puzzle to eat the truma, as we learned in Yavamis. Divi Rabbi Dosa, Amar Rabbi Dosa, V'chi ma asala arvi alos. What did this Arab do to her? Tosfos says we say Arab because in Pirkei Avos we learned that they got a lot of the znus that came to the world, they got it, they're blessed with that. Just because he was, fondling her, he was abusing her, he's molesting her, but not with a full bia. Posla Minikuna? No, it doesn't make her Posla Mikuna. Yeah, we could assume that maybe the captors would take liberties, but if they were intending to ransom the girls, as it was commonly happened, maybe they wouldn't go all the way with those liberties. So Rabbi Dosa is makel for her to even eat truma. Amarabba, Dil Malahi. Maybe Rabbi Dosa is not the same as Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah. Ad kan lokam Rabbi Yehuda, hacha ele shaloye chote niskar. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda is saying that we don't want the chot to be discarded. We don't want a sinner to benefit. The sinner we're talking about is the me'anis, a man who is violating, the Jewish man now is violating the Jewish basula. Now if he violates her and then says, oh yeah, but she had been captured for 6 months with the pagans, so there's no knas, I'm getting away with the knas, yeah? So Rabbi Yehuda doesn't want him to get away with that, so he would assume that she was still tahira legabe that knas. And the Tosfos here points out that the Tosfos ve'elu, he says, afol gav de midaraisa shruya lo havi becheskes b'li. He says, really, deraisa, we assume a girl, tries to avoid. We're going to see she tries to avoid getting abused by her captors. This is a chashash derabanan. A sukabula kol devareya says they made her as if she was beula because she was captured by the pagans. It's not necessarily true. So Rabbi Yehuda sort of relies on this chazaka deraisa that Jewish girls don't do that kind of thing, and even in captivity try to avoid that kind of thing. You understand, like they make themselves depressed and ugly and dirty, and they try to stay away from these things. So he would rely on that. So to say that the man who's ma'anis, a Jewish basula who had previously been in captivity, he still pays the fine. Avol chasam, but there by truma, kirabanan svirle, he would hold like the rabbanan, not like Rabbi Dosa. Inami, and she doesn't get to the truma if she was in captivity. Wouldn't rely on the chazaka so far. Inami ad kon lo kamar Rabbi Dosa chasam ele betruma derabanan. We could say that Rabbi Dosa is only meko by truma derabanan. And we had previously truma bizman hazeh, when we don't have majority of Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael, it's only derabanan. And even when we do have truma deraisa, in the truma from Chutz La'aretz, truma from Syria, and certain kinds of produce are still derabanan. So maybe he says only that's the stuff she's eating of all knas, but the knas of 50 shekel for ma'anis, that's deraisa. The Torah imposes that fine. Kirabanan svirle, maybe he holds like the rabbis and not like Rabbi Yehuda. So it's maybe not the same shita. Amar le Abaye, v'time with Rabbi Yehuda, hacha shlo yechote niskar. Is it true that Rabbi Yehuda says, I don't want the sinner, the ma'anis, the violator, to profit in the sense that he doesn't pay the 50 shekel fine, therefore he'll rely on his shita, she wasn't violated. But there's a brisa that says not like this. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, shavuya shenishbeis, a captured girl who was captured, harehik b'kedujata. We assume she's still in her chazaka of not having been violated by these pagans. Afilu bas eser shanim, even if she's 10 years old, apparently the pagans had a thing for 10-year-olds. Kesuvos matayim, she gets a kesuva of $200. 200 zuz, actually, that's quite a lot more than dollars, Baruch Hashem. Chasa, maishlo hote niskar, ika. There's no hote niskar, because there's no chet here. She's just getting married, and we're writing up her ksuva. There's no actual ma'anis here. And we still say that Rabbi Yehuda treats her like a virgin, like a betula. She gets the 200. Chasam nami dilma mimne velo nasiv law. So there too, Rabbi Yehuda is giving her a ksuva of 200, not because for sure, she must be a virgin, even though she was captured for 6 months by the pagans. It's because if you say, well, yeah, if she was captured by the pagans, they might have done something, so her ksuva is only $100 zuz, then the suitors, the men who might be in shidduchim with her, say, well, she has this checkered history, I'm not so interested, maybe they'll be hesitant to marry her. She'll sort of stand out from other Jewish girls because even though maybe she's a basula, but she's going to have this personal history that's going to be like a red flag for the men who might otherwise marry her. And we don't want, according to Rabbi Yehuda, we don't want Jewish girls to be so different, to put them at a disadvantage lagabe other Jewish girls. Rabbi say, what day is it? Tu B'Av. Wow. Rabbi say, do you know how much the Ribono Shel Olam loves us? And by us, I mean every Jew in the world, every Yid in the world, Ribono Shel Olam loves, but especially the Yidden in the Daf Yomi. Ribono Shel Olam loves them, especially. Tu B'Av is the holiday of Shidduchim. Now, there are many reasons. So the Gemara brings in Tainus. This is a little Chazara. Tainus is there's a lot of sad things in Tainus, a lot of fasts, a lot of problems. But they bring at the end, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, lo hayu yomim tovim l'Yisrael kamisha sar ba'av Yom Kippur. They also do this on Yom Kippur, which is amazing. Shem benot Yerushalayim, the daughters of Yerushalayim, yotzot b'kli lavan. They went out wearing white dresses, she'ulin, borrowed. Why? Shelo levayish et mi she'ein lo. Everyone's borrowing their dresses so they don't look so different. They're all wearing the same kind of dresses. They're borrowed, which has advantages for both sides. If a girl's not wearing her own dress, chances are it doesn't fit so well and it's not, super tight. So it's probably a little loose, and that's also good for tznius. But someone who doesn't have a very expensive dress, a rich girl has a very expensive dress, but she's borrowing from a girl who's maybe not so rich. Maybe a girl who's not so rich is borrowing a very nice, high quality dress. So they're not they don't want to be mevayesh each other. So this is, you understand the sensitivity of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, just because a girl was captured by pagans, we don't want it to stand out when she's in shidduchim. We don't want her to be embarrassed. We don't want to add insult to injury. She had this traumatic event in her past, and now she's trying to get married and settle down and get over that and move on with her life. We don't want her to stand out to the men who'd be interested in shidduchim. That's Tu B'Av. That's this minhag, this beautiful minhag. Now, don't try this at home today, Rabbosai, but this beautiful minhag in the past, where the Jewish girls would go out to dance in the vineyards, in the fields, and the men would come out, and it's a beautiful thing. We're going to see. It's a beautiful thing. They were wearing borrowed dresses so they wouldn't stand out, so they would all be on the same level. Tu B'Av. Rabbi Yehuda, you see the amazing sensitivity to a woman who's been through a crisis in her life and is now trying to move on and come through and move on to the other side and get married and settle down. How sensitive Rabbi Yehuda is. It's a beautiful thing, and that's a lesson of Tu B'Av. It's truly inspiring for all of us to be more sensitive. Good. Savar Rabbi Yehuda b'Kedusha Kaima. Does Rabbi Yehuda really hold that she's really mamish, still a betula, even though she was captured by pagans? Hatanya, but the Raisa says a podeas shvuya, someone who redeems a captive, a humongous mitzvah. We learned, remember, in Sukkos, the men who are traveling to redeem captives, they're pater from Sukkah even, because they're doing a tremendous mitzvah. So Yisaina, he buys a captive from the pagans, he redeems her, he frees her, he can then marry her. Made ba, but if he testifies about her that she wasn't violated, lo yisena, he can't marry her. Rabbi Yehuda, mer ben kach ben kach lo yisena. Rabbi Yehuda says no, he can't marry her in any event. So when we just says apodeh hameid, this would include even a Kohen. So it sounds like Rabbi Yehuda says a Kohen can't marry a woman he testifies about or purchases, frees from these pagan captors. Hagufa kasha. This teaching itself is a kasha. Amra tapodeh yatashvuya yisaina. You say if we redeem a captive girl, he could marry her. V'hadar tana meid ba la yisena. But if you testify that she was unviolated, you can't marry her. Mishum de meid ba la yisena. Because he testifies her, he can't go and marry her. Hala kasha. No, it's not a kasha. Hachi kamar. This is what Baraita really means. Tapodeh yatashvuya umeid ba. He's both redeeming her with his own money, and he's testifying that she was pure and not violated. Yisena, he could marry her. Meid bokadi, if he's merely testifying that he thinks she was not violated, lo yisena, he can't. Mikomakim kasha, it's still a kasha. What's the difference? It's Mikomakim kasha the Rabbi Yehuda. It's still kasha Rabbi Yehuda, who said in our Mishnah that we assume she was not violated. Here it sounds like we assume she was violated. Amar Papa, Ema Rabbi Yehuda, Omer ben kach Yisaina. Let's amend the Baraita not to say lo Yisaina, but Yisaina. Rabbi Yehuda says he could marry her. Even a Kohen could marry her. Rav Huna brother Yeshua Omer le'olam kidekatone. He says no, you don't have to amend the Baraita. We can explain it like this. Rabbi Yehuda L'divrayhem d'Rabbanan kamar lahu. Rabbi Yehuda is telling the Rabbanan according to you guys. We see this all over Shas, that one Tana can make a teaching. It sounds not like him. It is him talking to the rabbis in their own opinion. He says, the Gemara speaks out, L'didi, to me, Rabbi Yehuda, bein kach yisaina. In any event, a Kohen could marry her. I don't assume she was violated. But for you guys who assume she was violated, you should say in any event he can't marry her. It doesn't matter if he's meid or he's podeh. That's what you should have taught. Rabbana on the podeh shavua meid ba yisaina. Why? So why do they say only when he's podeh her? Only when he spends his own money to get this girl out of captivity and rescue her, then he could marry her. Why? A man doesn't throw away his money for nothing. Now this sounds very transactional, but what he really means is, if there's a single man and he's looking to get married and the pagans show up with a bunch of beautiful Jewish girls and he's like, well, I got $1,000, he's got a beautiful woman. It's not really like that. He's going to look into it. He's going to talk to her. He's going to talk to the people around. He's going to make sure, if he's a Kohen, he's going to make sure nothing had happened to this woman, because he doesn't want to put all his money and resources on the line and pull to this girl and then find out Nebuch, he's a Kohen and he can't marry her because Nebuch, she had in fact been violated. So he's really going to investigate. We had this concept also by the woman whose husband went overseas. She's Daika, Yavamis wasn't, this was like 2 months ago, Rabosai. Daika Umitzvah, she looks into it because her personal marriage is on the line. If she gets remarried, Daika Umitzvah, the woman who looks into it very carefully, if one aide comes and says her husband really truly died. Here too, the man who's spending a bunch of money to rescue a captured Jewish girl, and he also wants to marry her, and he's a Kohen, he's going to look into it very carefully and find some Eidim and make sure she was not violated. So, but if he's made Bokadiv, he's merely testifying, Lo Yisein, I can't marry a Shema, Einav Notan Ba. Maybe he just, is attracted to her. He's a Kohen, and these gangsters, these pagans rolled into towns of Jewish girls. He sees one that's very beautiful. He says, I'll testify that she was not violated, and then I'll marry her. But he doesn't really know, Lamaisa. He's just, he's just attracted. It's tuba for both sides, so okay, we understand. He's with the times. Rami le Rav Papa bar Shmuel le Rav Yosef on the top of Lamed Zayin Amad Aleph. It's Rabbi Yehuda because of Kaima. Does Rabbi Yehuda really hold that a Jewish girl captured by pagans is still not violated, still a virgin? Tanya, but the Brisa says Hagioret Shenit Gaira, a convert that converted. Now this is really cute, Rabotai. We don't say the Akum that converted. We don't say the Nochri that converted. We say the convert that converted. This is a bit of a remez to those really cool stories that every convert that joins the Jewish people, in a sense, they were destined to be the Jewish people. In a sense, maybe the part of their neshama, their soul, was by Harsini, was by Naaseh V'Nishma already. They have some shaykhus already. They're just waiting for the goof to catch up to the soul. Sometimes our soul is like light years ahead of our body and our actual life, and then we got to catch up. So they were always destined to join the Jewish people. They're Giorach and the Gaira, Virat Adam. And then she sees blood. Now, quick review way back to Nida. The first Mishnah in Nida, we said if a woman sees blood and she had been dealing with Taharas, she had been like making truma sandwiches for her Kohen, she's married to a Kohen, she's making truma sandwiches for his lunch, and then she sees dam. The issue is, if the dam, the blood, leaves the uterus, it doesn't necessarily come out right away. It might come out after an hour or two, but at most 24 hours. So if she hadn't been checking herself to make sure there's no dam in there that's already out of the uterus, she might have had this blood separate from her uterus already 24 hours ago, meaning she was Tameya already 24 hours ago, and all the truma peanut butter and jelly sandwiches she made for the last 24 hours for the whole family, those are all considered Tameya as a rabbinical stringency. Saeed is nodding because he's always very careful when he makes his truma sandwiches. Very good. So she converted, and then she saw dam. So the issue is maybe this dam was already out of her uterus, before she converted and went to the mikveh. So maybe she was already tameya, and if she made the truma sandwich, she got a problem. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Daya Shaita. Rabbi Yehuda says it's enough from the moment she sees dam. We don't have retroactive tuma. There's no limafreya tuma in this case. Rabbi Yossi Omer Harehi Kechol Anoshim. No, she's like a regular Jewish woman. Umetama me'et la'et makida lakida. So she's tameya, going back la'et means 24 hours ago. That's the earliest time that the dam she's seeing now could have been out of the uterus and in the prostor. Or mepakida lakida, from the last bedika she did. Their minhag was, we learned at the beginning of Sota, they would do a bedika before they would start making their truma sandwiches or handling their kochim. Good. V'tzricha. And another halacha related to this, tzricha lahamtin gimel chadoshim, and she has to wait the 3 months. The famous, the chodshei of Chana of Yevama's fame. Remember that we don't allow a yibum within 3 months of the death of the brother, and because chalitza is compared to yibum, the same thing. We do a chalitza on day 91. We shouldn't have to do chalitza Rebosai, but if someone is doing a chalitza, tell them to wait 91 days until after the death to do their chalitza. Chodshei Rav Chana, the 3 months of separating. What are we separating? Guys, the second husband. Whose baby is it? So whose baby is we don't have those talk shows in Jewish tradition. We're like, oh, it's his baby, who knows who the father is? No, we know who the father is because of the halacha of Chodshei Rav Chana, that we make the woman wait 3 months. Even Rav Moshe is a tshuva. There was a couple that was separated 17 years, Nebuch. She finally got her get. He said you still have to wait 3 months after she gets her get before she remarries. It had already been separated 17 years. Rav Moshe says, because there's no exceptions to the Chodshei of Chana. We have to know who the real father is. We care about fathers in Judaism. We care about mothers, but we know who the mother is because, the mother is the mother. She gives birth. But the father, we have to know who it is in halacha, for Yerusha, for Kahuna, for all of these dinim. So he says, even after she converts, she has to wait 3 months before she gets married. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi mater le'aris le'nasamiyad. Rabbi Yossi allows her to get married immediately. So it sounds like Rabbi Yehuda is saying a gioret who converts, we're concerned she was being intimate with men prior to conversion. Within the 3 months prior to conversion, she might have gotten pregnant, a little while before she converted. Then she converts and she marries a Jewish guy. We had cases in Yavamas of a woman who converts in order to marry a Jewish guy, and that didn't look so great, and there was a discussion there about it. But if that happens, she marries a Jewish guy, and then she has a baby 7 months later. Well, is the Jewish guy really the father, or someone who was not Jewish that she was with prior to conversion? We have to know. Amar Lei, so the Gemara says, Gioret Shvuya Karamet. You're comparing Rabbi Yehuda's opinion by the Gioret that she has to wait 3 months before marrying the Jewish guy. and the shvuya, the captured Jewish girl, it's very different. Gioret lo menatra nafshe. A woman she's becoming Jewish. She's taking classes. She's planning to become Jewish. But lemaaseh, right now, she's living amongst idolaters. She grew up in a pagan society where really anything goes. And it's her, you understand, it's her last 3 months as a pagan. She might go to Vegas and live it up a little bit before she becomes Jewish. You understand? So, hamevin yavin, you know what I'm saying? So maybe she did get pregnant just prior to a conversion. And so we need to know who the father was. He's going to make her wait 3 months. But a shavuya, menatra nafsha, a shavuya, she's a Jewish girl. She grew up in Beis Yaakov. L'man Hashem, she's not going to be living it up with the pagans while she's in captivity. She's going to be trying to make herself appear ugly and unattractive to them so they don't abuse her. So it's very different. Rami Shavuya, Shavuya. So let's compare the case of a Shavuya onto a Shavuya to clarify what Rabbi Yehuda really holds. The Tanya, the Brisa says, a Gioret v'hashvuya v'shivcha, a convert and a captured girl and a maidservant, sheniftu, that's redeemed. Now, redeemed is the first verb here, but it goes on the Shavuya, because Pidyon Shvuyim is a tremendously huge mitzvah. Nitgairu, or she converts, or shenichshracharu, she is freed. Yeteirut al benot gimel shanim, and she's over 3 years old. She has to wait the Chodshei of Chana before she gets married to Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda makes a shvuya who's redeemed wait 3 months before getting married because he's concerned maybe she got pregnant in captivity. So you see, Rabbi Yehuda does not assume she was not violated. He assumes maybe she was violated. So that sounds very inconsistent with our Mishnah. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yossi allows her to do erusin and kedushin immediately without waiting. Ishtik. So he says, wow. So sometimes silence is the best answer. But then he says, Amrle midi shmeilach. You hear anything about this? Like, tell me, what's the halacha? I don't know the halacha. Do you know the halacha? How do we reconcile Rabbi Yehuda with our Mishnah, with Rabbi Yehuda in this Baraisa? Amrle hachi amar Rav Sheishis sharua shenivala. In this case, we saw her that she was nivelis, or we saw her, go behind closed doors with the pagan captors in a suspicious manner. Ihachi, my time of Rabbi Yossi. So if we saw this girl who was captured really be alone with her captors, with the pagans, why does Rabbi Yossi allow her to get married immediately once she's redeemed? Amar Rabba Kisar Rabbi Yossi, Isha mezona mishameshes b'moch. A woman who's involved in illicit relations uses birth control. Now the moch here, Rashi says, notenet moch le'achar be'ila. This is after the tashmish. Sha'evet azera. It's something, it's like sponge-like, it's absorbent, and it absorbs the seed. And there's actually a machlokes. When we discussed this in Yavamis Yud Beis Amid Beis, it came up Gimel Mishamshis B'moch, the Beberis Menika and Ketana. Okay, and it also comes up on Daf Kuf in Yavamis. When we discussed it there, it's a machlokes Rashi Taisvis. And Rashi says it's inserted after because there's a concern of hashchachas, wasting seed. Okay, and it's a machlokes if that applies to women as well. Taisos brings two opinions: one that it was after, like Rashi, but one that the moch is inserted before. So even though the zera is going to go onto the moch and be absorbed before it reaches the cervix, there is a deya in Taisos that allows that type of birth control. So it's an interesting machlokes about what is this moch and how is it used and when is it used among the Rishonim. So good. So Rabbi Yossi says, Isha who's involved in this, whether she's about to convert and she's in Vegas or she's captured by the pagans and they're taking advantage, she's going to try to use birth control. Shaloti taber. She doesn't want to get pregnant from these guys. Bishla magioret. So fine for a converted woman planning to convert soon. Kevin the daita ligure. She's intending to convert. She's in classes. Minator nafshe. She's going to be careful not to become pregnant. Shavuya nami. Captured girl, also a Jewish girl, also delo yada hecha mamtula. She doesn't know where these goyim are going to bring her. Maybe they're going to bring her to a place with Jews, and she'll be redeemed by the local Jewish community and marry a local Jewish man there, God willing. So she doesn't want to become pregnant from these pagan bandits. Shivcha nami, a maidservant, also the shama mipamara. She hears from her masters that they're going to free her in the near future, so she's careful to use birth control. Eliyotze b'shen v'ayin ma'ikal memar. But a shivcha who goes free suddenly because of a tooth or an eye, what are you going to say? Now, the din of the Torah is if a master is hitting his servant, which, it's nebuch, it did happen. But in Jewish tradition, if he causes a permanent injury, disfiguration, loss of even a tooth or an eye, any permanent injury, even the tip of a pinky, anything, even tip of an earlobe, they go free. They go free. It's not like the servitude we see in Tanakh and in Jewish history. It's a very difficult thing, but it's not the same thing that they had in the South, in the antebellum South, before the Civil War. It's not the same thing. It's not something we understand in modern times. It's very different from our understanding of human rights and human dignity. But again, if the slave was injured in this way, they would free immediately as compensation. They were also given financial compensation for this injury. So in that case, she wasn't really using birth control because she didn't know she was going to get her tooth knocked out and she would go free immediately. And if you tell me something happens memela, something that happens sort of by itself, Rabbi Yossi doesn't apply his din and he would have her wait 3 months. Hari anusa mafuta. Now you should know the Masorah Shas takes out mafuta. And dimamela, that those sort of happen by themselves. Now, anusa, we understand, the woman wasn't planning to get ma'anis, God forbid. That's the rapist's fault. But the mafuta, maybe it's an ongoing relationship, and she was kind of planning it, so she would have had the chance. Maybe that's why Mr. Shas takes it out. Maybe it was amidat laila achat, as they call it. So it could have been like a one-time thing. Dimamela. So those happen sort of suddenly. V'tanya anusa mefuta tzrichin lamtin gimel chadashim. The Rabbi Yehuda requires them to wait 3 months before getting married. Rabbi Yossi matilaris and asamiyad. Rabbi Yossi lets them get married immediately. So it's kind of surprising. So too with the shen v'ayin, a shivcha goes free because she lost a tooth. Ela amar Rabba Kesav Rabbi Yossi isha mezana. Why? Because isha mezana, if she's involved in relations, mithafechet, she will flip over. Kadesh lo titaber, so she will not become pregnant. So that's sort of a chiddush. So Rashi here says, mitchafechet sheyatza zera v'lo yiklot. It's some sort of yoga maneuver or jumping maneuver, so the zera will flow out of her prosdor and not gather into the cervix. Because you could do it after the fact. It's kind of like the morning after pill, but it's like some sort of physical jumping or hopping or some sort of yoga maneuver. Kulanosis can. He says, they all do this. It's interesting, Rashi. All the girls do this because it's really easy to do. The Gemara in Yevamos Lamed Hey, Yevamos 35, they also mention the same machlokas Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rashi over there says it's kal. He says it's easy to do. Now, apparently this has fallen out of, I don't think they teach this in kala classes anymore. I think it's fallen out of the common knowledge. So if anyone's like looked into this and discovered how to do it, don't tell the girls in Beis Yaakov, but let me know, because I'm very curious about like how this was actually done, physiologically speaking. But the Rashi apparently says it's easy to do, and they all do this if it comes up where they're involved in a sudden bia and they didn't prepare a moch for birth control. They do this morning after. It's not really morning after, it's immediately after kind of maneuvering. Ve'edach, and Rabbi Yehuda, who makes them wait, chayshina, and he's worried, shlo nitchafacha yafa yafa. Maybe they're not doing this maneuver very well to get the zera out before they become pregnant. So therefore he does make them wait 3 months, even though it was common for women 2,000 years ago to know how to do this maneuver to reduce the incidence of pregnancy. Now, L'man Hashem, why is this girl trying not to become pregnant? It's a very interesting psychological insight that our sages have. She's been captured by pagans. And she's hoping, God willing, they take her to a Jewish city, they take her to the Harda, somewhere with Jews, with money, and the Jews will redeem her. They'll buy her back. The Gioret, who she's among the Akum now, but she's going to become Jewish. So think of it, like right now, she's among people who, not the best shidduchim. She doesn't want to become pregnant from the guys she's around now. They're criminals or they're idolaters. She wants to become Jewish, and Baruch Hashem, there's doctors, there's lawyers, there's guys who go to Daf Yomi, there's guys with, who are great guys. She'd rather marry and become pregnant from one of those guys. If she shows up pregnant already, it's going to hurt her chances. So she's planning ahead, even though right now she's in a compromised situation, she's planning ahead to when she's going to have better options, better choices. And this is how Hashem programmed women, that they're looking for the best option. So it's not a pashut thing with shidduchim, but really when you're giving eitzah to young men, join the Daf Yomi, get in shape, get a nice wardrobe, make yourself a good option. And then you become more attractive. Like there's always room for improvement. There's room for improvement for all of us. Baruch Hashem, we're already in the Daf Yomi, but there's also Mishnah Yomi. Baruch Hashem, there's a lot going on. So thank God. So this is how Hashem, programmed the teva between men and women. Hashem makes the plans here, and Baruch Hashem, and in Yevamos Lamed Hey, they also say lahavchin ben zera kodesh, zera shalom bekedusha. So like. Women want a good shidduch. They want to wait to become pregnant from a better option, and Chazal knew about that and take that into account with the halacha. Good. So the end of the Mishnah brought up the source for the concept of kimle b'derabba minei, that we give them the worst punishment, not 2 punishments. And the Mishnah, the Gemara cites here, Shnemar v'lo yeh ason anosh yanesh. That's the pasuk where 2 men are fighting, and the pregnant wife of one of them tries to intervene and stop, and they're really fighting to the death. And then she gets shoved aside. If she dies, there's a death penalty for the shover. But if she loses the fetus, then there's monetary damages, but not a death penalty. Rabbi Silber actually mentioned this on Shavuos. Now, Shavuos feels like a lifetime ago, but he was giving an amazing drasha about abortion. And it shows this pasuk, Im lo yeh ason, it shows that the loss of a fetus, I'm not pasking, I'm just saying what Rabbi Silber said months ago. The loss of a fetus is not capital punishment, but it does have value, that even an unborn life has a value. He was saying, we don't paskin like the Catholics or the other side, but we follow halacha. That's what we do. So this is a source for Kimle B'Derabbaminei, that we make him pay, we don't make him execute. Ha-mehacha nafka, the Mar says, is that the source? Mechasam nafka, there's another source. Kadei rishasa, we punish someone according to his evil. Mishum risha achas atamachayvo, you punish him for one risha. Rish ato is a singular, one resha, one evil. But not for two evils, not for two sins. So Gemara explains why we need both of these. Hada b'misa umamon. So one of them is with death and money. So if he's chayav to death, we don't make him pay money. V'hada b'malkus umamon. The other one is lashes. Be'edim zomim, mean they get lashes. And if they get lashes, they don't pay money. Tzricha, we need both sources. The Yashmi, then Misa Mamon. If we said death versus money, Shem Deika Ibud Neshama. By death, we're going to make him lose his soul. So, Val Malkus Mamon, like a Ibud Neshama. By Malkus Mamon, he doesn't lose his soul. So, Amalo, maybe we shouldn't apply Kimli Rabbinei. And since he's only getting whipped, not losing his soul, we'll make him pay money also. Ishmin and Malkus and Mamon. If Torah only taught us about Malkus and Mamon, by Kimli Rabbinei, Shem Delo Chamer Yisura, his sin wasn't so bad to be worthy of the death penalty. Aval Misa Mamon, but if he is Chayav Misa in Bezdin, he did something really bad. The Chamer Yisura, that is, his sin is very bad. A Malo, we shouldn't apply him the Rabbinei, and he should not only be executed, but pay money. So Tzricha, so we really do need both psukim. Rabbi Meir, Damar Loke Mishalem, Rabbi Meir holds a person could get lashes and pay money. Tarti Lamani, why do you two psukim? Hada b'misu mamo, turning over to Amid Beis Rabbosai. One is by death and money. V'hada b'misu malchus. The other one is by combining death and lashes. Tzricha, we need both psukim. D'iyashmin and misu mamon. If we only excluded combining a death penalty and paying financial restitution, mishum da chada b'gufe chada b'mamone. One is with his body and one is with his wallet. So maybe we should allow kimli rabbinei and we pay both. A law of dinan. So maybe we wouldn't do that. We wouldn't make him pay both. Punish him with both. Aval b'misa malchus, but if he has a death penalty and lashes, the idividi begufe, they're both on his body. Ema misa arichtahi v'navid bay. Maybe so we'll start off with the lashes and then we'll move on to the skila. It'll be a party, yeah. So maybe because the target of the punishment is his body, so it's like one long misa if we start lashing him and then we go ahead and finish him off with his misas bezdin, his execution by the court. So we need both psukim to exclude that. The Yashmin and misa malchus, if we had a pasuk by misa malchus, by lashing and death, the tarti begufa, they're both on his body. Loiv dinan, we shouldn't do both on one target of punishment of all misa mammon, but death and money. The chada begufe, chada b'money, one is on his body and one is on his pocketbook. Ema novid bay. So maybe we should punish him like that with both. So tzricha. So even Rabbi Meir needs both psuki, even though he holds a person can get lashed and pay money. Lo tikhu kofer lenefesh rotzeach lamali. So then they ask, there's another pasuk, you should not take a bribe for the soul of a murderer. Why do we have this pasuk? Obviously, if he's chayiv misa, he shouldn't be able to bribe his way out of that. Damar Rachmana, because the Torah said, Lo tishkol mamona, don't weigh out money minay from him, v'tiftarei mikatola, to make him not have to be executed. You could understand, maybe a guy is very, very rich and he murders someone, he's going to try to be bribing and, say, listen, I have $1 billion, I'm going to pay $1 million to the widow and $1 million to the orphan, and I'm going to pay $1 million to the community, and maybe it would be tempting to let him off the hook and not execute him. No, the Torah requires that we execute the murderer, even if he would be setting up trust funds for the children of all his victims. Lo tikhu kofer lanu seli miklata, we don't take a bribe to allow him to flee to a city of refuge. So this is by a mistaken, an accidental or negligent death, where he flees to an ir miklat. So lamali, why do we not let him bribe himself into ir miklat if he's negligent homicide? Damar Rachmana lo tishkol mamona minai, we don't weigh out money from him. A tiftarei min agolas, to say is chayiv he's pater from Golis. We can understand also if a man lives in Baltimore and he owns a factory and he's employing 1,000 people, and if we send him to Golis, the factory has to close down and with the whole community will lose out. It would be very tempting to say, listen, you stay in the town and you keep running your factory and you donate all your profits to the widow of the man you accidentally killed. He fell into the meat packing machine, God forbid, or something like that through the negligence of the owner. So keep running your factory and you're going to pay for your damages and you're going to stay here. No, he has to go to Golutz because Torah requires Golus as his kapara. Trey Kwai Lamali, why do you need both psukim? Chad b'shogeg, chad b'mezid. One is if he killed by mistake, that's the Golutz, and one is if he killed on purpose. Tzricha, we need both. Iyashmin and mezid. If we only heard about someone who killed on purpose, that you can't take a bribe from him to avoid execution, Mishum T'chamer Surah, his crime is horrible. His crime is that of murder. You should know it's a very interesting thing. Remember, by the Egel HaZahav, Aharon Cohen helped them make the Egel HaZahav, sort of indirectly. He was Vayivin Mizbeach for the Egel HaZahav. And Rashi there explains, Vayivin Mizbeach, Vayavin Mizevach, that Aaron Cohen's intention was he understood, he had Havana, he was Yavin Mizevach from Chur, who was murdered when Chur stood up to the mob. And it started with the Eruv Rav. The Eruv Rav were still into Avodah Zarah, according to Rashi. They started it, and they got the Jews on board. And this mob of Eruv Rav killed Chur when he stood up and said, no, we're not going to do Egel. We're going to do Avodah Zarah. Moshe's coming back. Don't worry. We're not going to do Avodah Zarah. So it's an amazing thing because Avodah Zarah, along with Arayos and Shvichas Damim, are the big three that a Jew is required to give his life HaKadoshas Hashem to avoid Avodah Zarah and Arayot, forbidden relationships, and murder. And here, Aaron Cohen is saying, well, they murdered Chur, I'm going to help them do Avodah Zarah so they don't murder me. So it's really interesting. Those are both in the big three, but it seems that, according to Aaron Cohen, that murder is worse than Avodah Zarah. And he's not wrong. I'm not saying do Avodah Zarah. I'm not saying do murder or Avodah Zarah. I'm saying in Aaron Cohen's situation, he's saying if the Jews murder me, they're going to have murdered the Kohen Gadol, and there's not going to be a kapara. They can't get the Kohen Gadol back. It's going to be horrible. They're now going to be able to do tshuva. There's going to be no Aaron Cohen. It's going to be terrible. But if they do Avodah Zarah, they can still do tshuva. There's no, I'm not saying Avodah Zarah is a victimless crime, but he'd still be alive to help them do tshuva. But if he stood up to the mob and they murdered him, he would no longer be alive to help them do tshuva. So this was the calculus. You understand the difficult situation Aaron Cohen was in. So you see that Chamer Isure, that murder is like the worst of all possible crimes, even worse in a sense than Avodah Zarah, even though we don't do Avodah Zarah either. But you understand the calculus of Aaron Cohen when we see these words that the murder is Chamer Isura. Aval Shogeg, the man who killed by accident, and remember in Maseches Makos, second parak of Makos, we go through, there are accidents that are negligent, there are accidents that are gross negligence, to use the legal terminology, it was foreseeable fault or unforeseeable, it was derech yirida, derech aliyah, so that's the second parak of Makos, you review that as your homework. So there it's shogeg, it's negligent, or it's a mistake, or it's an accident, he didn't know the guy was there when he threw the axe, things like this. Delo chamer surei, it's bad, but it's not like murder. Malo, maybe we shouldn't exclude him from taking a bribe. Maybe we should allow him to stay in Baltimore, run his factory, and pay $1 million as restitution and not go to Golis. So, Iyashmin and Shogeg, if we heard only by Shogeg, by the case of Golis, Mishum Deleika Ibn Neshama, we're not going to kill the killer himself. We're not going to execute him. We're merely going to send him to Golis. Aval Mezid, a murderer on purpose, to Ika Ibn Neshama. Well, so we lost one life, we're going to end another life? That would be inappropriate. Maybe we would let him make financial restitution. Aimaloi, so maybe not. Maybe we would allow him to bribe. So tzricha, so we need both psukim. Another pasuk where we explain why it's needed. Vel aretz lo yichupar ledam asher shufach ba, ki im bedam shovcho. And the land will not be cleansed only of blood, the blood of a murder victim, that it was spilled on it, only with the blood of the spiller. Lamali, why do you need this pasuk? This is a pasuk by Egla Arufa. Remember, they find the victim of a murder, and they don't know which city it's from. They don't know who killed him. They bring the Egla Arufa. They bring this cow and they decapitate it. Egel Nasan, Benachal Asan, to be a kapara. Now, you might have thought that gets the guy off the hook, but no. So how do you know if they did this ceremony? They washed their hands of the blood, they decapitated the the egel there. Achar kach nimsa harig, and then you find the murderer. You find the guy who did it. Minayin she'en potrina, so he's not putter. He's not putter. You might have thought we did the ceremony, we've cleansed the land of the spilled blood. You might have thought he's putter. No. Shenamar la'aretz lo yichupar ledam sheshuvach ba v'gomer. So atatavar dam naki. We have another pasuk. You have to remove dam naki mikirbecha. So sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So no, he's not putter because we have the pasuk la'aretz lo yichupar ledam sheshuvach ela dam shavcho. That you have to punish the murderer, even though you've done egla arufa and you've done this ceremony to cleanse the doubtful murder, you still have to punish the actual murderer when you find him. It's interesting because just reading the Torah, just reading the Chumash, it sounds like there's a lot of bloodshed going on. But again, in Makos, we learned that how often would the Sanhedrin do an execution? I heard a 70, I heard a 7 maybe. You're both right, because the Mishnah says that a Beis Din, a Sanhedrin that executed a criminal every 7 years, was called bloodthirsty and inappropriate, and some say every 70 years. Because there are a lot of technicalities before you find someone guilty of capital punishment in halakha. So it's, I'm not saying Judaism is against capital punishment, but it was extremely, extremely rare that it actually happens l'maaseh. So it's not quite like capital punishment in the modern, secular, quote-unquote, justice system. It's really not the same thing. In Jewish courts, there's no DNA evidence, no hearsay, no entrapment, no plea bargains. It's all kedas kedin, to eidim, no mistakes, drisha v'chakira, very, very strict rules for questioning to make sure that what we think happened really happened. So really, if a capital punishment occurs in halakha, it's a very serious thing. The judges fast before they hand down the sentence. It's very serious, and we know it's true. Okay, good. So moving on to the next pasuk. V'tatavar adam naki b'kirbecha lamali. Why do you need the pasuk? You will clean up the innocent blood from among you. Mibayile, the Ketanya, we need this like the Baraisa. Minayin limimatin b'sayif. How do you know those executed with the sword? Shuminit savar, that you put the sword in the neck to do the execution. Talmud Lomar v'tatavar adam naki mikirbecha. This pasuk is by Egla Arufa. Hukshu kol shovchei damim Egla Arufa. We have a comparison, a hekesh between Egla Arufa and murderers. And murderers who are convicted by Sanhedrin are executed with the sword. Malahalan minit savar, just like Egla Arufa gets killed through the neck. Af shovchei damim, so murderers who get saif, the sword is execution, minit savar, the sword goes in their neck. Im malahalan bekavitz. So too, but Egla Rufa, we use an axe, a cleaver, and we do it on the back of the neck. Afkan bekovitz, so too, a murderer, maybe we should use an axe on the back of the neck. Now it's interesting because in medieval Europe, this was a royal execution was done with an axe to the back of the neck. So it seems to me that what was happening was the ancient kings and queens of medieval Europe, I'm not talking about the Jewish ones, I'm talking about the Christian ones, it seems like they were reading about Egla Rufa in the Bible, but they did not go to Daf Yomi, Rabbosai. So they did not understand that it's Sayif in the front of the neck, it's not the axe in the back of the neck. That's why in Europe they're executing people with an axe in the back of the neck. They didn't learn the Gemara. So Baruch Hashem, we learn the Gemara, we know how to execute convicted murderers with swords. Good. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Ravua, why don't we use an axe to the back of the neck? Amar Kra, so the Torah tells us why we don't execute a murderer with an axe in the back of the neck, instead we use a sword in the front of the neck. Why? Ve'havta l'recha kamocha. Love your fellow man as yourself. Barer lo misa yafa. Give him a gishmak death. Give him a good death that's instantaneous and painless to the best of our ability. We don't want him to suffer in death. We don't want it to be drawn out. We don't want it to be gory. We want it to be immediate. And therefore, the front of the neck, Rashi says, that's where the trachea and the esophagus are. That's where we do shechita. Shechita is a painless. Now, there's a lot of criticism about shechita, but lamase, what it does physiologically is it creates a instantaneous drop in blood pressure to the vessels that fuel the brain. So after they do shechita on an animal, it can't feel anything because there's no blood pressure in the brain. That's what it does physiologically. So too, by a murderer, we have to give him sayif. The Torah requires we give him sayif, we give him the sword for execution. So we do it on the front of the neck, where those vridin are, and the kan and the veshet, so he'll die instantly without too much trauma. The Tosfos here points out, Tosfos here says, bar lo misa yafa, dim yitzchav sokim belibo havename misa yafa. He says a dagger in the heart, that's also a nice death. It's kind of a shocking Tosfos. He says, but we compare it to Egla Rufa, so we know it's a sword in the so we know it's by the neck, not a dagger in the heart. And by Haftorecha Kamocha teaches us that it has to be the front where the Vridin are, so will have an instantaneous death. This is shocking. The Haftorecha Kamocha means we kill him nicely. The Shita Mikubetzis brings an explanation. So the Torah says l're'echa. It could have said achicha, chavercha. L're'echa is a filu ra shebecha. Even the evil one with you, ahavta. You even have to love someone who has done evil. And we also know when someone's executed, it's a kapara. If they're executed by Sanhedrin, it's a kapara. We also know that the Sanhedrin would require them to do tshuva before the execution. The judges would also be misvada with him. They'd all confess their sins, so he would be innocent. He's not innocent, but he's a Baal Tshuva when he goes for execution. Slaman Hashem, if he's a Baal Tshuva and we love him, why are we executing him? This is what the Torah requires. And it's a deep yesod in love. V'havtorecha kamocha means you give him a good execution. There's a big mistake that's made in mainstream society. Baruch Hashem, we live in a fanatical religious subculture and we know the truth because we learn the Gemara. But in mainstream society, they say love is blind. And their notion of love is this like Disney Hallmark wishy-washy, like, oh, love is about giving. Love is putting people up on a pedestal and they're perfect. That's not love. That's infatuation. That's crazy. By the way, infatuation, there was a famous Gemara in Moed Katan, 18b, about the guy who got infatuated and prayed for a certain girl, and then he got her and he wished he would die. So I do want to refer you, we don't have time now, but I want to refer you to, I taught Daf 19, but you know how it is with the Daf. You end on Amud Beis somewhere and you get to go over Amud Beis a little bit. So I taught Moed Katan 19, and it's up on, I refer you to rabbisilber.com, Moed Katan 19, and I taught that Daf, and I talked about Moed Katan 18, about the guy who prayed for a specific girl because he was infatuated with her. We talked about the Rambam and free will, so we'll refer you. It was January 31st of this year. It feels like a lifetime ago, Baruch Hashem. But Moed Katan 19, go look it up. That's your homework on rabbisilber.com. And we talk all about free will and true love and zivug. But anyway, it's a mistake to say love is blind. Rabbi say, who loves you the most in the world? Hashem. Good. Which person loves you most in the world? Who? Also good. Which other person loves you most in the world? Someone besides Saeed, please. Yourself. No. Who? Your wife. Good. Your parents also. Your wife and your parents love you more than anyone in the world. Who criticizes you the most in the world? Your wife and your parents, Rabbosai. Because love is not blind. Love is a magnifying glass. Okay? Infatuation is blind. Obsession is blind. When you love someone, you see the positives and the negatives. You see both sides of them. Love is not blind. So this criminal, we love him. He's a Jew. He's our brother. We love him, but he overstepped the boundaries. He has his faults, and he has to be punished. The Torah requires that he be punished. Nothing else to do besides execute him. Love is not about just, oh, it's love, it's sweet, it's great. That's not what love is. Love is also about setting boundaries. We love our kids. We don't let them stay up past midnight eating marshmallows, okay? We have to set boundaries. The Torah requires us, even though we love all of our brothers, we have to have expectations and boundaries and punishments when people overstep the boundaries for the good of society. So this is Ve'havta l'recha kamocha. There's another proof from, we don't have time, but from Yitzchak and Rivka, that Yitzchak marries Rivka, brings her into Sarah's tent, sees all these wonderful signs, cloud of Shechina, and then he loves her. The pasuk says, then he loves her. Why? Because he's looked into it. He's seen her positive attributes. So one last thing, by Rosh Yeshivas, that's all he taught me. What's the definition of love? Love is the emotional pleasure of seeing the virtues of another person and identifying them with those virtues. When you see the good in someone, specific things, I see all of you waking up early, giving of your sleep and your time with your zrizas to come and learn Torah. I love all of you. So it's a lesson for all of us. We see the good in other people. We find things to love about our fellow Jew. Ve'havta l'recha kamocha. Happy Tu B'Av. Shkayach. Amen.